The Stanley sisters received a conservative and conventional upbringing, matured, and became a remarkable female quintet far ahead of their time. They were extremely individualistic, self-sufficient, enterprising, and determined for that generation of women. However, Mimi, Mater, Nanny, and Harrie never became conventional ladies, but one of their sisters, the future mother of our idol John Lennon, the charismatic and irreverent Julia, broke slightly from the Victorian mold, being the most flirtatious of all and the one who would bring the most surprises and shocks to her beloved and close-knit family. Before beginning this story, let's put some context into the story so you understand the strong personality of Pop Stanley, the patriarch of this unique family. In the history of the United Kingdom and the British Empire, the Victorian era corresponds to the reign of Victoria, daughter of Prince Edward. This sovereign ruled from May 20, 1837, until her death on January 22, 1901, a period of 63 years and 216 days. During this period, the British Empire expanded enormously and became the world's predominant power. It was also a period of industrial, cultural, political, scientific, and popular change. Victorian society was rife with moralisms and disciplines, with rigid prejudices and severe prohibitions. Victorian values can be described as Puritan, among which the following stand out: thrift, a desire to work, the extreme importance of morality, the duties of faith, and Sunday rest. The society of the time didn't allow morality to be compromised. Men dominated the scene in both public and private spaces. Women adhered to private values, with a status of submission to men, and were responsible for the care of their children and the home. Analyzing the personality of the Stanley family patriarch, George Ernest Pop Stanley, we can deduce that he possessed all the characteristics of a classic Victorian father, because he had been raised to be one. Pop Stanley ruled his home under strict rules of conduct and morality, ignoring any questioning or disobedience from his daughters. The main Victorian commandments established by Pop that the Stanley sisters were to follow to the letter were: rigorously learn their lessons in school, mind your manners inside and outside the home, dress in your best clothes on Sunday morning at church and in the afternoon at Sunday school, practice the value of thrift through frugality and austerity, care for and protect your younger siblings, and never neglect household chores. The Stanley sisters rigorously followed these rules, and before going to bed, they left their house impeccably tidy so they could sleep with a peaceful conscience. Aside from these strict commandments, the children of the Stanley family were always protected from any truth that the adults considered unpleasant or unnecessary for their children to know. The children's world was completely separate from the world of adults. The adults hid family problems, misfortunes, and dramas from their kids in every imaginable way, keeping them sheltered in a bubble where the atmosphere was perfect. The adults never sat down to talk with the children about transcendental family matters. Nothing dire ever happened in the children's lives, except for an occasional reprimand, such as a slap or a well-deserved spanking. Although it may be hard to believe, corporal punishment was an accepted custom at the time and was seen as just and necessary. Even the church practiced this cruel corrective method in its Sunday school classes. Pop Stanley was an overprotective father to his daughters and ensured that their boyfriends and suitors didn't commit indiscretions or make unseemly advances into his home. It's said that when George Smith began courting Mimi, Pop's interference constantly frustrated him, as Stanley imposed a strict visiting schedule and, in a show of generosity, allowed the couple to sit in the back room at Newcastle Road only when he or his wife were in the front room. Before it was too late, he would abruptly burst into the back room and loudly announce to his future son-in-law that it was time for him to return home. The Stanley sisters' husbands were not often seen on the scene. They were nondescript figures who went to work and didn't interfere in their wives' lives and decisions. They were never heads of the family. They never imposed their laws. The Stanley sisters had too much character to tolerate being treated as women of the time were normally treated. And because of their special personalities and temperaments, almost the only role left for their spouses was that of providers. According to Harrie Stanley's beautiful daughter, Layla, the husband's primary function was to earn money. The Stanleys were only nice enough to them to get their bills paid. There were never any arguments or shouting matches in the homes. It was just that the men weren't very important. It was a very large family, with many children demanding attention, and the men simply didn't exist. Mimi, the eldest sister of the 5 Liverpool Amazons Stanley, was the one who caused the first shock in the family. At that time, it was common for girls to form a family once they married. Marriages were formed primarily to have children who would come into the world with the worthy mission of perpetuating the family name. So this was not the case for Mimi, since, as the eldest sister, she had been responsible from a very young age, practically since she was a child, for caring for, watching over, and helping with homework for her 4 younger sisters. Mimi had assumed the role of mother prematurely. So she said bluntly and stoically, the very moment she accepted the marriage proposal of the charming George Toogood Smith, "I'm not going to have children." She announced it, and she kept it. Mimi was also terrified by the idea of living enslaved to a stove and a dishwasher. Mimi married George on September 15, 1903, when she was 33 and he was 36. They moved to 251 Menlove Avenue in the elegant, middle-class urban suburb of Woolton, in a lovely residence they named Mendips, and where John Lennon would begin to live when he was 5 years old. Mater had her own particular way of protesting convention. When she became a mother, she immediately dismissed the possibility of being called Mama from that moment on. It was too common a name, because every woman she knew called her like that. And so, Elizabeth Jane became Mater. She married Charles Parkes in September 1932, 2 years after giving birth to her only son, Stanley Parkes, who was born in 1930 when she was just 22. Stanley was affectionately known as Stan. Charles Parkes died in 1944, at the age of 50. Mater mourned for 5 years and remarried in December 1949, to dentist Robert Hugh Sutherland. And Georgina, Nanny, was a career woman, a rare find in the 1930s. She was a civil servant and married Sidney Cadwallader in September 1946. They moved to Cheshire, located on the River Mersey. Nanny lived happily with Sidney for 25 years until her beloved husband passed away in 1981 at the age of 82. They had a son, Michael, in 1947, when she was 36 and he was 48. As soon as beautiful Michael was born, his mother declared, "That's enough. I'm not going to have any more children." Harrie also caused a bit of a stir in the Stanley family because she married Ali Hafez, an Egyptian student at Liverpool University, in 1936 at the age of 20. They went to live in Cairo, the capital of Egypt. Sadly, Harrie's husband died suddenly after having a tooth extracted. Harrie returned to Liverpool with her daughter Layla, while Ali's parents were hot on her heels, wanting custody of their granddaughter Layla. Then, to the family's dismay, Harrie was declared an alien because she was the widow of a foreigner. For a long time, she had to appear in Liverpool courts. It was quite a dramatic episode in Harrie's life. In 1947, she became romantically involved with Army Captain Norman James Birch, and they conceived a son, David Birch, who was born in 1948. But the one who would garner much attention to this day, and about whom rivers of ink have been spilled, is Julia Elizabeth, Pop Stanley's favorite daughter and the mother of our beloved John Winston Lennon. She was the most unpredictable, the most unusual, the one who caused the most headaches for the family, especially for her beloved father. Here's a taste of her antics for your enjoyment. At 24, she asks her boyfriend to marry her as a dare, the elusive ship's steward, Alfred Lennon, who was no angel of devotion to anyone, accepts the challenge and they marry in secret, completely unknown to their parents. Julia becomes pregnant again at 31 by a naval soldier named Taffy Williams, while still married to Alfred. In fact, they were never divorced. The daughter resulting from this flagrant infidelity, Victoria Elizabeth, is given up for adoption and taken to Norway. Incidentally, John Lennon learned he had a sister when he was already a Beatle. Julia then begins a relationship with John Bobby Dykins, who was a womanizer with an evident weakness for drinking and partying. Mimi discovers that the little boy John doesn't have his own bedroom and sleeps in the same bed as Julia and Bobby Dykins. Mimi and Julia begin a legal battle for custody of little John. Julia reluctantly hands John over to her sister Mimi to be the boy's legal guardian. Julia reconciles with her sister Mimi, but sadly, just as everything was going swimmingly, our beloved and charismatic Julia was tragically killed in a car accident on July 15, 1958, at the glorious age of 44. John Winston Lennon was about to turn 18, and his life was shattered. John would later comment, "I lost her twice. Once, when I moved in with my aunt. And again at 17, when she physically died." In the next episode, we'll reveal all the details of Julia Elizabeth Lennon's tragic death. We'll tell you what happened from the moment Julia left her home at 7 p.m. until 3 hours later she was fatally struck on Menlove Avenue, just a few yards from her sister Mimi's house. How did Mimi find out about the accident? Who informed John of his mother's death? How did Julia's partner, Bobby Dykins, react? What happened to Julia's daughters? Who hit John's mother? These and other questions will be revealed in our next video. Don't miss it.